before Jen starts demonstrating the proper techniques for container gardening, I wanted to give you a little bit of a nutrition talk about the importance of vegetables in our life in particular. So our mothers always told us to eat our vegetables because they're good for us, right? Okay, what studies show is that most adults don't eat near the amount of the recommended 2.5 servings a day. Why would this be? Well, it might have something to do with the ease of eating them or the convenience. But this particular food group, the vegetables, I would call them nutrition superstars. Should I refer to them as that? Have you ever heard the term nutrient dense or nutrient rich? Well, if we take that word apart or that term apart, a nutrient is a food substance that provides energy or is necessary for growth and repair. So some examples of those nutrients would be carbohydrate, protein, and fat, where we get our calories or energy, vitamins and minerals, which are useful for growth and repair. And rich just means something's valuable or worthwhile. So nutrient rich is going to mean that we're getting quality nutrition from vegetables. An extreme example of what nutrient rich would look like, you can see this picture. If we took a soft drink, okay, a cola, and it contains some energy or some calories. This bar down at the bottom, and you can see these other spaces are blank, those are different vitamins and minerals that would be represented. Well, for about a 12 ounce or can of pop, it's about 150 calories, provides 0 nutrition, just calories. If we compare that, and like I said, this is an extreme example, but if you looked at a vegetable like a tomato, for a fraction of those calories, you can see how many of these bars are filled in, indicating they're a high quality nutrition. So you get more bang for your buck, so to speak, if you have a vegetable as opposed to a can of pop. The bonus is that vegetables tend to be really low in calories. So science tells us that consuming high amounts of produce, fruits, and vegetables can decrease our risk of chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, some types of cancer. So the bottom line is that it's important to eat a variety of vegetables to get all those nutrients that we need. There's not one in particular that's necessarily better than the other, but over the course of a day or a week, incorporating a variety of colors and types of vegetables ensures that we get those vitamins and minerals that our body craves. Vegetables are especially good sources of potassium, folate, vitamin E, vitamin C, and fiber. And all those nutrients can help our heart health. They can help contribute to lowering cholesterol, managing diabetes, blood sugars, and also give us a feeling of fullness, which is a good thing, right? Nobody likes to be hungry all the time. So vegetables are one of those things we're always trying to get people to eat more of because they're not going to sabotage your effort to lose weight or manage your blood sugar or your heart health. So still, once again, I say, what stops us from eating the vegetables that we eat? I want to suggest that maybe it's a matter of convenience. Would you agree? Okay. So perhaps today, after Jen gets finished demonstrating her technique of container gardening, you might be prompted to start a container garden of your own if you see how easy it is. So what better way to have fresh, healthy food outside your doorstep? In addition, gardening has shown to help reduce stress. You can't use that and provide a form of relaxation. So after she demonstrates the proper technique, we have some samples over there of the foods or the herbs and vegetables that she's demonstrating for you to try and some recipes. I'm going to touch on herbs. There are nutritional benefits of herbs, not necessarily those vitamins and minerals that are provided so much, but when we flavor our food with herbs, that can really enhance the flavor of food, expand our palate, because if we're not using herbs, what are we usually using to season our food? Salt, fat, sugar. So by using some of those herbs and incorporating them into our recipes, we're less likely to use those other ingredients that aren't so healthy for us. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Jen O'Brien, and she has volunteered to show you how to plant some of these vegetables and herbs in a container. she has a credential of being a master gardener. So I'm really thankful that she was here to help, and I have a feeling that's why you're here. So at this point, I'm going to come forward.
Hi everyone. Like Beth said, my name is Jennifer. I'm a master gardener through the Ohio State Extension Office at Fellows Riverside Garden. Just to kind of give you a little information about the extension offices. Back over 100 years ago, Ohio State Agriculture Department was trying to find ways to get information to all the rural areas and the farmers in Ohio. It wasn't real easy access for them to get information or up-to-date information, so they started extension offices. And there's one in every county, which continues today. Those extension offices are a wonderful source of information. They have a ton of programs constantly going on. I happen to be involved with the Mahoning County Extension Office because I live out that way. But like I said, every county has one, and if you go on their website, check out what information they have. Like I said, they have the newest up-to-date information, different programs that you can get involved with gardening, just to kind of learn some of this stuff. One of the things that they do offer is what they call a master gardening program. Usually it's about a 10-month program that you attend about twice a month and learn all the basics of every gardening thing. And then you become a master gardener, and you could go out and volunteer in the community or help with programs, you know, just kind of like this. So that being said, I just came to talk a little bit about container gardening and kind of give you the basic rundown of where to start. It seems to be that container gardening is becoming very popular. Some of the advantages to it is that if you live in a small space with not a lot of yard, a condo, an apartment, or maybe not great soil to plant in, or maybe a lot of shade, container gardening is a great way to still have fresh vegetables. You can also, with containers, kind of follow the sun. Sometimes you can move it around if you need to. You can avoid the frost. It's real easy to get them in real quick if you know it's going to frost. Some people just use them as a decorative element on their patio. There are some very beautiful plants that will also produce vegetables for you. And most importantly, I think, is the health aspect of it. I think there's nothing that says more summer than having some fresh vegetables. You know exactly where they came from, what was put into them, how they were grown, and I just think they taste better, obviously. Some of the disadvantages to container gardening is, number one, that it takes a little bit more effort because you're going to have to water more often. You're also going to have to feed it more often. And sometimes when you get into some of those bigger pots, it's a little bit harder to maneuver and relocate or handle. So in those cases, you might want to consider some of the gardening shops have little on wheels, like little coasters. So you set the pot on there and you can kind of move it where you need to go. So first things first, let's talk a little bit about different types of containers. Of course, there's all different types of containers. Number one, most importantly, with that container, whatever you have, you want to make sure you have drainage holes on the bottom. And if you don't, quarter-inch drill, just drilling some on the bottom is probably the easiest route to go. My stepmother loves flowers and gardening, and everywhere she has containers, and she's thought of everything between picnic baskets and ceramic roosters and cow, just a little bit of everything. So, you can go crazy and make it all your own if you really want to. Plastic is probably the easiest and the cheapest, and like I said, easy to drill through if you need to with some holes. Of course, there's the traditional terracotta or clay pots. Those tend to be a little bit heavier, nothing wrong with them. But they also may need just a little bit more watering because they're more porous. You can use wood boxes, but of course you want to stay away from any treated wood. And just also consider that some of the darker colors may hold on to that heat a little bit more, so you really want to watch it for drying out type of thing. If you talk about watering, when you have containers, every day pretty much is what you're going to have to plan on watering. And sometimes the smaller pots, or in the middle of July when it's really hot, sometimes it ends up being twice a day, which could make it a little tricky when you want to leave for a couple days or you're on vacation. So either in that case you need to come up with a plan, or there's even some very simple techniques that you can do to keep it watered while you're away. Just for instance, I happened to be leafing through a magazine the other day, and they, I know you can't see it real well, but they happened to show this little pot here. So all it really is a glass container sitting on top of a little terracotta thing with drain holes in it. And they mentioned that it's sold at Gardners.com. You get 2 of them for $9.95. So a very simple way to keep it gardening, or keep it watered. I, on the other hand, I try to minimize the amount of cost when I'm gardening, because I just think, you know, the more basic you go, the better off, the more you tend to keep with it and doing it. I've even seen things, which I am going to try this year. I say every year I'm going to try it, and I haven't yet, but I am going to try getting a pop bottle and cutting off the bottom and drilling holes in the cap of that pop bottle and sticking it in the soil upside down, and either continually watering it when there's no water, or the rain itself will kind of in there and slowly start to dissipate out. And then they have every other fancy thing that you can think of, self-watering containers, those earth boxes, you know, all that kind of stuff is available out there. Like I said, nothing wrong with any of them, whatever works for you. I just try and keep it as simple as possible. I kind of brought these boxes just to show you, which I kind of like. They do kind of have a bottom here. If you were to take it apart, you would see this has the drain holes underneath, but this part on the bottom is just a little reservoir of water there. So it lets it drain out, and if it ever gets above here, of course, it's going to cut off the bottom here. So it's not like your roots are sitting in water and you're ending up with root rot, but it kind of just gives you, look more decorative, doesn't get the soil everywhere, kind of makes it a little nicer. Moving on to fertilizers and amendments. When you talk about fertilizers, most plants, if you want to talk in general, kind of like what they call a 10-10-10 mixture. And if you look at any fertilizer, they have numbers on the container that tells you. And pretty much those numbers always stand for the same thing. The first number being the amount of nitrogen in there, the second number being the amount of phosphorus in there, and the third number being the amount of potassium in there. So, you know, percentage overall, 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, 10% potassium. So the thing about when you do have plants in a container, in order to grow, they need a lot of nutrients, and they're going to use up a lot of those nutrients very, very quickly. So that's why you need to continue to feed them throughout. And really, once they get established, once you plant them, you want to do weekly fertilizing of those plants. We could talk a little bit about organic versus chemical fertilizers, and that could take us another 2 hours to talk. It's all personal preference about which direction you want to go. You could really go either way. Number one, looking at anything, of course, you want to stay away from any herbicides when you're talking about vegetables that you're going to end up eating. But if you want to go the organic route, when you talk organic, those organics are derived from a plant or animal product, so they're all natural. And when you do add some of those organic fertilizers, they add to the soil itself other micronutrients. They kind of make the soil itself healthier. The downfalls, if you are going to use organic, is that usually they're a little bit slightly lower in nutrient content. They tend to be a tad more expensive, and they're a little bit slower working. So, there is a whole range of different organic materials you can use. You can even try and combine, a couple of them, keeping in mind at what level you want to look at the nitrogen. Okay, if I add something that has this much nitrogen, and then I'm adding another thing that has this much nitrogen, and another thing that has this, you kind of want to balance out those numbers. Like I said, kind of staying around the 10-10-10 ratio, although every plant is a little bit different. You could always look at what that particular plant wants to grow. You could do organically things like compost or a compost tea, if anybody's ever kind of gotten into that realm, which is more or less just the compost with some water, sitting for a little bit, and then you use that as your fertilizer. Bone meal, blood meal, fish meal. They have things like the tomato tone and the garden tone. And then opposite of that, or the other side of that, is the chemical fertilizers, which are synthetically made. And again, there's a wide range of all of those, between the Miracle-Gro or whatever else that you find out there. The thing about chemical fertilizers is that it does not do any long-term benefits to the soil. It's just that feeding and that's it. There's no other micronutrients to kind of keep the soil healthy. So that's a couple things to think about. They either have like a granular type that you would just kind of sprinkle in the soil, staying away from the base and stem of the plant, kind of around the edge and working it in, or a water-soluble type of fertilizer, whatever works best. When you do water, one thing that I want to mention is you want to try and water the soil itself and stay away from that above getting every leaf as you go, because you want the water to obviously to be in the soil, but also if some of that water sits on those leaves, that hot, humid type environment is where you start getting a lot of the diseases and insect problems from. And also, ideally, watering in the morning is probably your best bet. So let's talk a little bit about planting. One thing I'd like to mention with the planting itself is when you get these nice, beautiful plants from either the garden center or you happen to do them inside, one thing that you always want to try and do is what they call hardening off the plant. These plants, when they're in the greenhouse or they're in your home, they're used to the environment in your home. You stick them outside with the wind and the rain and the sun and everything else, and it's too much stress for them. So you want to slowly introduce them to the outside, and that kind of means maybe the first day putting them in some shade for a couple hours and then taking them back in. The next day putting them in a little bit of sun and a little bit of shade for maybe 3, 4, 5 hours, put them back in. That last day, maybe do the full sun if that's what they want and leave it there for a couple hours. So over the course of 3 days, introducing them to being outside. When you do plant, you want to just get your soil to about 1 inch of the top of the pot. When you're planting, you kind of want to avoid a lot of that pushing down on the soil. You're decreasing those air pockets in that soil, which is no good for the plants. They need those air pockets to survive. What I like to do is I put my soil already in these pots here up to about 1 inch of the top, and I like to water them thoroughly to the point where water's running out the bottom, and then I let them sit for a few hours. So you know that all the soil is pretty well watered, which becomes especially important when you're talking about something like seeds. So first thing I'm going to just plant here is a little bit of basil. So I found this herb at one of the garden spots, just some, I think it's large leaf basil, which smells very good already, obviously. Basil is very easy to grow. You can also direct sow it from seeds, which is another, it grows very easily, meaning just putting the seeds right in the soil and letting it come up. One thing you want to consider when you're doing seeds is that sometimes you need to thin that out. It looks great when you put a bunch of seeds in there and you see all this green coming up and you think, oh, that's great. But when you have 50 plants in a small container, they're not all going to survive. And that's another thing about container gardening. You want to pick the right container for what you're going to grow. Sometimes the bigger, the better. Because plants, obviously, they don't look that big right now, but when they start to grow, they will really grow and take off. And the more that you don't have air circulation in there, and the more that you have plants fighting for the same nutrients and water, the less success you're going to have. So really, you just kind of take one of these basil plants off here. And I have to say that I was really nervous that the garden centers were going to run out a lot of what we were talking about. So I bought these fairly early, and they've been sitting in their containers for a while, which probably isn't the best, but that's okay. They'll still do fine. So you just kind of want to plant at the same level of where it was growing in that container. Make a nice hole for it. And just fill it in around the sides, kind of like we said, being careful not to do that heavy pushing down on it. And then once you do have it planted, of course you want to water it again, which we're a little bit limited in here. I don't have any water, so you would want to make sure that that's pretty well watered right after you plant it and it stays moist, because as soon as those roots dry out, you're not going to have a very happy plant at all. You'll also notice when the containers start to dry out, that soil pulls away from the sides and gets real hard, and at that point it's really hard to kind of get it back to being healthy again. Basil, like I said, is very easy to grow. It likes warm weather, but it's also even a little bit frost sensitive. So you probably want to set it out about 2 weeks after the last frost. When you harvest it, all you need to do is kind of pinch those leaves off. This plant's probably pretty close. I would maybe let it grow a little bit higher before I really started using it as basil. It likes the sun. Go ahead and put it out right in the sun on your patio. And you also kind of want to, every once in a while, just pinch some of those leaves off, even if you're not going to use it. It kind of promotes the plant to bush more and make more leaves. And if you kind of just let it go and didn't pinch those leaves off, it's going to go to seed, and then the leaves won't taste very good. Basil is also another great thing that dries and freezes very well. So if you have it in the summer, you know, you can freeze it and have it through the winter, or dry it, whatever your preference is. There are a ton of different varieties of basil. I think on that picture it shows you a bunch of different, or one of the different varieties, purple. And again, like I said, some people use those as a decorative. You know, maybe put in a bigger pot some green and some purple and kind of make it look real nice among their other flowers. So that one is the basil. And then moving along to the cilantro here, which happens to be one of my favorite herbs. It's great in a lot of different things, especially some of the guacamole type stuff, things with lime. Some just reminds me a lot of summer type dishes. So same thing, if we plant this cilantro, just kind of make a nice hole for it and get it out. Cover it back up. Now cilantro is a little bit more of a cooler seasonal crop. Kind of likes the cooler weather. It lasts, typically, it's a very short-lived, lasts about 8 to 10 weeks typically, and it is an annual. However, if you happen to have it, or you have it out in your garden, what you'll notice is that when it does start putting up seed, that's what we call the coriander, and some people harvest that for some dishes. Those are the coriander seeds. And cilantro itself, again, if you had it out in the garden and you let it go to seed, it would self-seed, meaning that those seeds, once they fell to the ground the following year, it wouldn't be the same plant that comes up, but the seeds itself would make another plant. Cilantro, like I said, typically likes a little bit more of the cooler weather, so maybe a tad bit late for cilantro, but that's okay. This plant will probably do just fine. What I might consider doing, especially on hot, humid days like today, is maybe getting afternoon shade to it rather than keeping it fully in the sun. Also makes a great indoor plant that you can just put on a windowsill and keep watered. Let's see, did I miss anything? Usually, you know, and again, you could do, with the cilantro, you could do a spring plant, and then do your summer ones like the basil, and then replant the cilantro again in the fall. They do also make some slow bolting varieties that, you know, you could look in the stores for maybe just to save it just a little bit longer in the summer. One thing about if you do have it indoors, keep it away from any heat source And maybe just every 3 or 4 days turn it so that you're not getting that plant that tends to lean over. You want to just, same thing, pick the leaves off of this to harvest it, and it's probably best to use it that same day. They really don't do too well with freezing or drying. So it's, again, a great indoor plant that if you wanted it in other seasons like winter, you could throw it on a windowsill, no problem. Same thing with the rosemary. There is a rosemary recipe for some salad dressing over there too. Makes a great indoor plant. And you can transplant it very easily, even just cutting off a stem and putting it in some soil, and you can have a bunch of rosemary plants if you really wanted, or share with some friends.
Does it depend on what time of the year you do that? Does it depend on what time of the year you do to start from rosemary?
Yeah, your best bet is probably spring. Not to say that it wouldn't work at other times if you had the right conditions at home, but spring is probably your best bet to do it. Let's also talk a little bit about some lettuce. I kind of just brought a couple different varieties. This one is a black-seeded Simpson loose leaf lettuce. I have just a green leaf lettuce, and then also a romaine, which I've seen this become popular. I've even seen it in some of the gardening centers that already, you could buy the box already with the lettuce in it. Very simple to do on your own. We'll just have to make some room here. Lettuce, same thing, kind of likes the cool weather a little bit better. So early spring, it's even a little bit frost resistant. Early spring and fall are probably your best bets. But again, if you have a container, it's kind of easy enough to pick up and put in the shade on a really hot day, or if you really wanted to do it inside, that could be an option. Go ahead and plant this lettuce. It's very easy to grow. It's a great idea for kids. Kids like to see it, and sometimes when kids see it and see what they planted and what's growing, they're maybe a little bit more likely to try to eat some of it. Lettuce doesn't require a real deep container at all. It doesn't even have to necessarily be this deep. It can be fairly shallow. And you can plant them fairly close. They kind of adapt to their environment. And when you want to go ahead and harvest, all you really need, you could do one of two things. You can take each leaf off as you go, or you can just cut the whole thing off. Some of the varieties, like I think the Butter Crunch, even if you did cut it off, it would probably grow one more time from there. And then once you kind of harvested your salad, come fall, you can take it all out again and replant again for your next harvest. Salad kind of does really well if you kind of do more of like a succession planting, meaning that, you know, if you plant everything at the same exact time, you're going to have a lot of lettuce to eat very quickly. And maybe for everybody that's not the best idea. So salad also grows very well from direct sowing the seeds. So what I'm going to do today is just show you a little bit of this lettuce in here. Can't be squeamish in the garden, that's for sure. Yes.
Always thought that there are a lot of weeds in the bottom that we should
Break them up a little bit. It's not a bad idea. I try not to mess too much with roots unless I really see one that is really wrapped. Almost all white. These didn't look too bad. I think they're going to be just fine. But yeah, when they've got that all white that you can see, probably best to kind of, either just slice them a little bit, break them up a little bit, any of that kind of stuff. So the last one we'll do the leaf lettuce here. Salad again is another one that bolts with hot weather. We kind of did a couple studies that said, well, what is the reason really why it is bolting? Is it really just the hot weather? And what they seem to have come up with is that not necessarily just the hot weather, but it's a combination of the hot weather, the decrease in moisture, watering, and the longer days that kind of contribute to it. So if you can keep them fairly well watered and maybe keep them out of that hot sun, they might do a little bit better, although they do make varieties that are maybe a little bit less resistant to bolting. Another idea with salad is that you can put it in a container with maybe a taller plant to kind of give it a little bit of shade. So maybe you have a big enough container with some tomatoes, and on the bottom you have the lettuce on the bottom that has a little bit of shade. So like I was saying with the succession planting, is that if this was early spring, this would probably be ideal. We would have our lettuce already planted there, and this is already going pretty good already. You can then just go ahead and add some seeds to the mixture itself. So once you've kind of used up this salad, hopefully right behind it is another bunch of salad. So I have just a romaine type lettuce here. And if you notice, these seeds are very, very small. The general idea when you're planting seeds is you don't want to get them a depth, usually about 1.5 times its diameter. So you can see these seeds are very small, so you don't need a lot of soil covering it. All the packages will kind of tell you how to plant them. Some even require direct sun, direct light to germinate, so in that case you don't want to even cover them at all. So if I just make a couple little holes in here, and again I put maybe 1 or 2 in each hole, and then if I need to thin out, when they do come out, I will thin it out. Just gently cover it up. Now when you're doing seeds, you kind of want to watch with the watering. You don't want to do a big watering can and just dump the water over top, because in that case your seeds are going to kind of get all jumbled around and lost in the mixture. What you might want to consider doing instead is misting it, or even watering from the bottom is sometimes a good idea. In that case, you're just putting water underneath it and letting it soak up from the bottom. And then at the same time on this end, I'm going to do a little bit of this black-seeded Simpson, that same variety that we planted here, and we'll just have a couple little spots. Our seeds to go. Okay. One thing to remember too, of course, the seeds need water. Constant watering is key with seeds too. You don't want to let those dry out. I wanted to talk a little bit about tomatoes. Of course, summer, everything says summer about tomatoes, but it's a little difficult to plant in here. So just to talk real quick a little bit about tomatoes, you need a big enough bucket for the tomatoes. Usually, like at least something 20 inches, or even like a 5-gallon bucket would work well. You want something that isn't going to be top heavy either. As those tomatoes start to get larger, you want to make sure the wind's not going to knock them over. The thing about tomatoes is they can get rather bushy, and then you lose a lot of the air circulation in it, and that again sets you up for some diseases and things. So you want to make sure there's good air circulation through there. What I tend to do with my tomatoes is maybe the first 8 to 10 inches, take those bottom branches off completely so that you do have air moving up through. You do have to cage or stake tomatoes, obviously, if they get very tall. Some of those cages, again, you want to make sure that it's just not a massive bunch of green. If you look down the top of it, you want to be able to see the bottom a little bit so that air is moving through. So again, you might need to prune a little bit in that case. And the only other thing with tomatoes too is that, and on this picture it kind of shows you, you do need to cut off the suckers of the tomato. So what that means for the most part, if you look at this picture, you have your tomato plant growing straight up like this, and you have a branch going out like this. What tends to start happening is that another little sucker kind of sneaks in between there. So this sucker you want to go ahead and prune off from the tomato plant itself. If you are going to stake it and hold it up, you can use any twine, a nylon twine, which is very cheap, but won't hurt the stems. If you use like a baler twine, that works well too, plus it's biodegradable. The only difference about tomatoes, that I told you that you always want to plant it at the soil in which it was planted in the pot. With tomatoes, you could do it a little bit different, and you could actually plant it at the first level of the branches, pruning off those branches and then putting that underground. It'll give you a little bit better root system, because from those branches then you will get roots coming out there. You could use any type of variety of tomatoes. I mean, there's zillions of different tomatoes. Some of them now they have dwarfed tomatoes that are specifically, they're a determinate tomato, meaning they will only grow to a certain size, which works well with containers. The only thing with the dwarf varieties or the determinate varieties, number one, you don't want to prune them. You don't want to cut off those suckers. And number two, that crop tends to ripen all at the same time within about a 2-week period. Whereas the indeterminate ones will keep growing and producing until the frost or the cold kills it off. The thing about fertilizing, real quick with the tomatoes, is I tend to like using what they call tomato tone, which is an organic fertilizer. Tomatoes, if you give them a lot of nitrogen, are going to do a lot of green leafy and not a lot of fruit. Yeah, so you want to not do a ton of nitrogen. What they like in the beginning is some phosphorus to kind of get the fruit going, and then towards the end like the potassium. They also like a little bit of magnesium, which is why I like the tomato tone. They kind of add a little bit of other micronutrients to the soil that those tomatoes like. Let's see, is there cucumbers? Again, cucumbers can easily be grown in a pot. And we're probably, the picture shows it here, make a little trellis for them so it could grow up the trellis. The fruit will end up being straighter. You could do the same thing with pole beans or sugar snap peas, any of that kind of stuff. We talked a little bit about combining plants. If you get a big enough pot, you can combine a couple things in those plants. Tomatoes with salad, or tomatoes with basil, any of that kind of stuff. At the end of the season then, when you're going to clean up, you of course want to remove the plants from there, add it to your compost pile if you have a compost pile going. You want to get rid of all the soil. Reusing that soil year to year is an easy way to kind of spread disease. You also want to scrub the pots to kind of get rid of any of that extra soil, and then you want to clean it with 1 part bleach to 10 parts water to make sure you're getting rid of any other organisms that might be living in there that you don't want. In conclusion, really, I think gardening is excellent. I love it. I love being outside. I think it's great in the summertime. And most importantly, just have fun with it. There's a lot of different, like I said, different decorative containers you can use. I was even online and I saw glow-in-the-dark containers, which my kids thought was excellent. I kind of try and like to get them excited about gardening. Just try not to make it too difficult. It should be as simple as possible. I think that's how you stick with it the best. Not making anything overly drastic. In some years you might have great luck. Some years maybe not so great luck. And you just kind of learn as you go, trial and error. There's 100 different wives' tales out there that some work for some people, some don't. And with the internet nowadays, I mean, you can find out anything and everything that you ever wanted to know about anything. Not that all of it is always correct. Which is why, in conclusion, that website that I talked about for the Ohio State Extension Office is a wonderful resource for any type of information. And I do have Mahoney's Extension Office address listed here on this paper. And it's mahoney.osu.edu. Also, the Stark is stark.osu.edu. One thing I will also mention is Eric Brett. He's out of the Extension office in Campfield at Mahoning. He is wonderful information and resource. If you send him an email at his email address here, barrett.90@osu.edu, he will send you, I think it's a bi-weekly horticulture update of tips. You can send questions into him, all the different programs going on, all the different gardening groups, things that maybe they're finding this year that they didn't have last year, you know, all that kind of stuff. So send him an email and you can get on that email list to get all the information. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
I've read once that when I've got little bugs on my plants, can I use a diluted solution of dish soap and spray the plant?
Yes. Yes. Or, you know, an insecticidal soap is another one that you could buy at the store and same thing, spray it off. Stay away from, I don't know the exact reason, but in my head, everybody has always said stay away from Dawn for some reason. But any other dish soap and just spray. Most of it, maybe it's aphids, is that like the little teeny black ones. You know, make sure you're getting underneath of the leaf too, where a lot of them like to hang out.
Well, there's lots of, my sister's having lots of little holes on the leaves right now. What would be the
Of what?
On my lettuce. I don't know if it's a mite, but
Are they in the ground?
Yeah.
They're in the ground.
I
Yeah.
don't know, I don't see any evidence of snails. It isn't a chomp, chomp, chomp.
It's not.
It's a polka dot like on the leaf, you know.
Yeah. You know, there's so many different things out there. And different ways to get rid of different things. You know, if you did think it was you know, maybe slugs or something along those lines, you don't think it's any of. The best thing to do to look for critters that are bothering your plants is to go out at night and look. And I had even heard using like a red light rather than a flashlight, something with a red tint to it, and see what kind of critters are kind of getting at it is always a good idea. You know, with slugs, sometimes we have a lot of slugs in the garden, and I tend to try and put out, like bury a plastic plate of beer. You know, they kind of get attracted to that. Yeah, not the good stuff, cheap stuff. Yeah. So it's hard to say without knowing exactly you're looking at the lettuce, what it could be. There's a multitude of things. Any other questions?
Over here on this side, we prepared a few samples of some of the plantings that Jennifer presented. And I just want to explain to you before you come over and partake. There's a recipe in front of each one. But the first one here is a black bean and corn salad. So we've incorporated the cilantro into that particular dish. It has, the beans are going to be a high fiber ingredient, the corn as well. It has hard healthy avocado and olive oil in it. A variety of vegetables, including the tomato and the cilantro, like I said. So help yourself, there's forks in here. Then we just have some green leaf lettuce and a recipe sheet with 4 different homemade salad dressings on it. One of the benefits of making your own dressing is not only the price, it's pretty cost effective, but sometimes in certain salad dressings, the first ingredient is water. So what happens is as you pour it on your salad, it kind of drips off of the leaves, so then you may end up adding more to get that flavor. But these salad dressings are using the hard healthy olive oil, a 3-to-1 ratio of an oil to an acid, either coming from a fruit juice or vinegar, and then some different herbs and seasonings in it. The balsamic dressing has rosemary infused into that. And then the last food item is a caprese appetizer. It includes tomato, rich in lycopene, the basil leaf, and fresh mozzarella cheese. It's a really nice summer appetizer. So it's just those 3 ingredients on a toothpick with some olive oil drizzled over top, some balsamic vinegar, and then some pepper. If you wanted to add a little bit of salt, adding a little bit of salt at the end of a dish is not a major contributor of sodium to our diet. It's the processed foods that we eat that our major source of sodium. So finishing a food with a little bit of salt is usually okay. You get a little more bang for your buck again for the flavor. And then the last item is some cucumber infused water. So you've seen the big craze with all the flavored waters and off again, it's budget friendly. There are a million ways you can infuse water. We chose cucumber today. It's just a really nice fresh taste. You can use citrus. You can even use combinations of herbs with the different vegetables. It's really up to your preference. And again, it's kind of fun to make up your own recipes. But all we did was pour the ice water over the cucumbers. So we want you to enjoy that. There's recipes in front of each one if you like that. And if you have any other questions for me. All right, well, thank you for coming today.